Okay, so today we are going to be talking about Severus Snape. And when I just announced that I was doing this video, didn't even state an opinion on him, people were already duking it out in the comments. So this should be fun. So Professor Snape is a character that I have always hated growing up. As a kid, I saw him as a person in a position of power that was belittling, humiliating, and bullying children. Pretty easy guy to hate. And I have carried those opinions throughout my life. But with this last reread of the Harry Potter series that I did, which if this is your first video of mine, I have a whole playlist full of Harry Potter videos as I went through this last reread of the Harry Potter series. And with this last reread, I wanted to go in with a fresh perspective. I wanted to erase all the opinions that I had previously of him, and I wanted to go into this reread very open-minded and try to figure out what I think of Snape without any bias. Which is why in all of my review videos of all of the books, I've refrained from talking about Snape at all, or at least hardly at all, and definitely haven't put in any opinions about him because I wanted to wait to form my opinion about him until I reread all 7 books and then decide. So during this reread, I have written down every single scene that Snape shows up in or is talked about in. Every time that his name appears, I took down a note. And then after I was done reading through the series, I spent 2 full days ignoring work and instead spending the entire day rereading every single scene that Snape showed up in 7 books. And I started to wonder, what am I doing with my life? Analyzing a fictional character this much. But I'm actually really glad I did because I have some thoughts. During this very long process of analyzing Snape, I have some thoughts and I'd like to share with you a lot of scenes that Snape is in. I want to dissect his motivation, his character, his actions, and what seems to be his mentality. And then I want to talk to you about the conclusions I've come to. And then we'll have a civil, cordial, and respectful discussion in the comments. I'm gonna ask that you stick with me for a little while here because I am going to go through a lot of Snape scenes and I'm gonna be brutally honest about them, the good and the bad, and what they mean. So if you're extreme on one side or the other of Snape, you're not gonna like when I'm being honest about my evaluations for the other side. But stick with me, and then once we've looked at all of his actions, I'm going to talk about what, to me, that means for Snape. We're going to start in Snape's childhood. So I'm not talking about this chronologically for the books, but chronologically for Snape. We're going to start with his childhood, and we're going to work our way through his life. Severus Snape is a young boy coming from a difficult household. He has mismatched old clothes that are either too big or too small. His parents fight constantly. He even at one point says, Dad doesn't like anything much. We first meet him spying in the bushes on the girls, and we have several lines that show us that he's been doing this for a while. He tells Lily that she's a witch and immediately makes friends with her, but he's also immediately at odds with Petunia, which is both of their faults. This is shown through them bickering every time they're together that we see, and him even accidentally causing her physical harm. He does go poking around Petunia's room at one point and shows Lily what he saw, therefore driving an even bigger wedge between the two girls. And he also shows that he doesn't have a lot of value for Petunia due to her being a muggle, and says things that shows his prejudice toward muggles and muggle-borns pretty early on in his life. We get a few scenes from Lily and Snape as young kids, and it's evident his very strong affection for Lily as well as his care for their friendship. But the first big scene that we get from them is in Hogwarts, and it's when Lily is confronting Snape about his friends. She says, "Why do you hang out with those people? They're practicing dark magic on people." He says it was just a laugh, and she tries to explain to him that practicing dark magic on innocent people is not something to laugh at. And then he shifts gears talking about Potter because he knows that James has a crush on her, and when she validates that she's not interested, the conversation is over for Snape. He doesn't really care about fixing his behavior. He only cares that Lily isn't going to leave him, essentially. Then, again, speaking in chronological order for Snape, we have the scene where Sirius is bored, and so James and Sirius attack Snape for no reason. When challenged about why they're doing this, James even says, "It's more that he exists, if you know what I mean." They knock him down, bind his body, make pink soap suds come from his mouth, and mock him in front of a crowd. Then they let him get up only to knock him back down. Then they hang him up by his ankles, showing off his old underwear, and continue to mock him. After Lily makes them put him down, when James says that he's lucky that Lily was there to defend him, Snape's response is, "I don't need help from a filthy little mudblood." This obviously hurt Lily a lot, and then James hangs Snape upside down by the ankle again and says, "Who wants to see me take off Snape's pants?" Or underwear for you Americans. We don't know if James did take off Snape's underwear or not, but either way, basically, if you want to boil this down to Muggle terms, essentially what they did was knock him down when he wasn't doing anything, and then kick him on the ground, teasing him in front of a laughing crowd, and then disrobing him. This is more than just bullying. Now, Lupin does offer a little bit of another perspective. He does later on say that that was the most popular spell in school when they were kids. You couldn't walk down the hallway without somebody getting hung upside down by their ankles, and that Snape attacked James unprovoked as often as James attacked Snape unprovoked, which does give a little bit of a counterbalance to that one-sided memory. However, Snape was ganged up on, humiliated in front of a laughing crowd, which I don't think Snape could have done to James, and repeatedly tried to stand up and then just get knocked back down over and over again, which is it's just as much as what Lupin said adds a little bit of perspective, it actually doesn't change that much. Anyway, fast forward a little bit, Snape does try to apologize to Lily. He says that he didn't mean to call her that. And she basically says, "I'm out of excuses for you. I've been defending you for years. My friends don't understand why I'm still friends with you." And then she even says, "You're trying to join a supremacy group that wants to exterminate my people." And he doesn't deny it, because he really does want to join Voldemort and become a Death Eater, despite the fact that this supremacy group wants to kill her. He again tries to say, "I didn't mean to call you that slur though," and her response is, "What does it matter? You call everybody else of my birth this word. What's so different about me? Might as well start calling me that too." Fast forward some more. Snape is now a Death Eater. He has officially joined the supremacy group. He is actively working under Voldy, and we watch him while he's spying on Trelawney's meeting with Dumbles. He overhears part of the prophecy and then goes running to his master to send him to kill some random people. This is important because Snape couldn't care less if innocent people die as long as he's serving his master. Until his master's actions actually affect him and his master goes after someone he cares about. Now, Dumbledore does try to explain this to Harry when Harry first finds out that Snape did it, and he's furious. And Dumbledore says, but he didn't know. He had no possible way of knowing which boy Voldemort would hunt from then onward, or that the parents he would destroy in his murderous quest were people that Professor Snape knew, that they were your mother and father, which isn't a good defense at all. He was fine with the murder of innocent people until those innocent people were people that affected him, then suddenly he cared. It's not a good defense, Dumbles. Fast forward again, Snape finds out that Lily is gonna die. He's terrified and he goes to Dumbledore asking for help. Dumbledore says, "Could you not ask for mercy for the mother in exchange for the son?" He said, I have asked him. You disgust me." Dumbledore says. "You do not care then about the deaths of her husband and child. They can die as long as you get what you want. Hide them all then. Keep them safe, please. And what will you give me in return? Anything." So Snape couldn't care less about this innocent child that's going to be murdered. All he cares about is protecting the woman that he has loved his entire life. Never mind that her husband and her child will be murdered. As long as she's safe, he couldn't care less. Which is a pretty selfish love. He doesn't actually care about her happiness at all. He only cares about his happiness in keeping her alive. Yikes. So Voldemort does actually try to do this favor for Snape, and he does tell Lily to stand aside multiple times. And because she's a human, she refuses and protects her son. She dies. Snape is sad. He goes back to Dumbledore, and Dumbledore says, "You know why she died. Make sure it's not in vain. Help me protect Lily's son." He agrees, but tells Dumbledore never to tell anyone. This is when Snape officially changes sides. His actions, the cause that he has been supporting, has finally affected him, and he sees how horrible it is, and he changes sides so that he can protect Lily's son. We'll dissect that more later. Right now, we're just focusing on actions. Now, we're gonna go through the books. I'm gonna go through all 7 books of big scenes with Snape, big moments of seeing his actions or his motivation. We're gonna look at the good and the bad that he did, and it's not just one good act. We will see multiple good things that he did. I wanted to spend extra time on how he started and what he became, because I think that that's really, really important. Now we're gonna look at who he was all throughout the books, and I'm gonna move through these a lot faster than I did this first bit. So I'm gonna start out actually really quick by saying I've heard people say that, oh, well, you know, we get everything from Harry's perspective, and so it's very one-sided and probably really exaggerated, and Snape really only picked on Harry and his friends. He probably wasn't this way to all his students, and I'm sorry, but I'm gonna prove you wrong. He was mean to every student that wasn't a Slytherin. But anyway, in the very first class that Harry has with Snape, he already starts in on him. Calls Harry out right from the very beginning and says, oh, our new celebrity, trying to already kind of knock him down, even though Harry hasn't done anything to show that has an inflated head at all. And Snape knows that Harry's coming from an abusive home, but Snape already has an idea in his head. I'll show that in a minute. Then he just immediately starts quizzing Harry, asking him very specific questions, and when Harry doesn't know the answers, he says, oh, didn't bother to open a textbook before you came? Which Harry internally says, well, I did look through it, but I didn't memorize it. In that same first lesson, Neville messes up and Snape snaps, idiot boy, at Neville, then turns on Harry and snaps at him and yells at him for not helping Neville or warning him that he was doing the wrong thing, even though Harry wasn't even Neville's work partner. He accuses him of intentionally letting Neville do wrong because he thought that it would make Harry look good if another kid was humiliated, which is just baseless, obviously. And then after his lesson, Harry tries to tell multiple adults that he's pretty confident that Snape hates him, and both, I think it's Percy that tells him, and I know Hagrid does as well, they both basically just say, oh no, Snape hates all his students, don't worry. And that's just in the first book, but multiple times throughout the series, adults continue to tell Harry, no, that's just Snape, he just acts that way to everybody. The fact that people just brush off that this teacher is so cruel to all of his students is not awesome, but it also shows that Snape is mean to everyone except Slytherins. Then we're going to jump to book 7 when we're in Snape's memories again, and it shows Snape from book 1 where he's pacing Dumbledore's office, accusing Harry of a bunch of stuff. Dumbledore puts it best. You see what you want to see, Severus. And that's exactly what happened. Harry walked into Snape's potion class, and Snape already determined what kind of kid Harry was and started treating him as such, never giving Harry a chance to just be his own person. He assumed that he was James. Now let's talk about the good that Snape did in this book, because contrary to popular belief, he didn't have one good act at the end of his life that was supposed to be his redemption. He did a lot, actually. In book 1, Quirrell is trying to buck Harry off of his broom. Snape is muttering a counter curse the entire time, trying to protect him. Then, at the next Quidditch match, Snape was refereeing, which, made him really unpopular with all the teachers because they all thought that he was doing it to sabotage the Gryffindors. But actually, he was doing it trying to prevent Quirrell from trying anything like that again. We also see Snape cornering Quirrell and trying to figure out how much he's learned about how to get to the stone. He's actively trying to prevent Quirrell from getting there, specifically only because Dumbledore told him to. And when Quirrell lets a troll in on Halloween, because apparently every adult in this series is an idiot, nobody seemed to put 2 and 2 together and think, hey, Quirrell put a troll in the dungeons to protect the stone. Maybe this is Quirrell too. Only Snape. Snape's the only one that figured it out, so he went running to the 3rd floor corridor as well to cut Quirrell off and keep him from being able to get to the stone, which was his intent when he let the troll in. Keep in mind that Snape didn't become a double agent until the end of book 4. Now, Dumbledore did very strongly suspect that Voldemort was coming back, and Snape did trust Dumbledore a lot. So I'm sure he anticipated that as well, but It's very clear that that's not why he was so horrible to his students. He did that because he was a mean guy. And it's also clear that he wasn't just protecting Harry for his double agent status either. He had his own motivations for absolutely everything he did in life. Book 2, we meet Snape again at the gates for the castle when Harry and Ron crash a flying car into the Whomping Willow. Snape immediately starts accosting them, accusing them, putting words in their mouth, and trying to get them expelled. That's a theme with Snape. He is constantly trying to get these kids expelled, even though he's also constantly trying to save Harry's life. He's a weird guy. Again, when Harry is found with the petrified Mrs. Norris, Snape immediately says, oh, well, maybe Harry was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but also probably not. I'm pretty sure he should be expelled. And then we also have the scene in book 2 when Lockhart decides, hey, let's have a dueling club, even though I don't know how to duel. Snape can be my assistant. Don't worry, I won't hurt him. So then Snape hits Lockhart with a spell, much harder than he really needs to, which is fine. Lockhart deserved it. He grabs Harry and Malfoy, pairs them together, and then when Lockhart says, hey, Neville, do you want to be my example? Snape, of course, has to humiliate Neville because that's his favorite pastime. And then says, no, Malfoy and Harry, you should be the ones on stage. And then he whispers to Malfoy a spell that he should use during this duel, which he knows Harry can't defend because the second the snake is out, Snape immediately goes to get rid of the snake. He literally just did it to mess with Harry, even though that snake isn't part of what they were supposed to be doing in the duel. He set it all up just so he could mess with Harry. But that's pretty much all he did in book 2. Now book 3. Let's start with the good things he did in book 3. Despite Snape's hatred for Lupin, which I can accept because even though Lupin didn't bully Snape, he was a passive onlooker and didn't do anything to try to stop his friends, it seemed, in that memory. And I think it's quite clear that Lupin feels terrible about that. Lupin kind of takes all of Snape's abuse and everything that Snape throws at Lupin that year. He takes it with a lot of grace, and he even makes excuses for him that year and in later books as well. And I think it's in large part because he really, well, no, I know it is because he actually says in one book that he really regrets how passive he was and how he just let this stuff happen and never tried to be an influence for his friends. So I think in large part that's why Lupin handles Snape so well and with so much grace. But regardless, that was kind of a tangent. Regardless, Snape, despite his hatred for Lupin, which I get, he still, all throughout the year, I'm sure by Dumbledore's request, makes a potion for Lupin to make his transformations less horrible. And he brings these potions to Lupin without being asked. Even when Lupin forgets to take them, forgets to take the potion, he still brings it to him at the end of the book. Snape also tried repeatedly to warn Dumbledore that he thinks that Lupin is letting Sirius into the castle when they all thought Sirius was a bad guy. Now, this is also jaded with his own ambitions against the people that he hates, but this is also a theme that we see with Snape all throughout the series. We see him repeatedly going to Dumbledore and trying to warn him when he thinks something is wrong, because really, Snape is kind of Dumbledore's right-hand man throughout the series, that we don't realize it until the end. And he goes to Dumbledore with all these warnings, partially because he's bitter, and some of it is definitely jaded, but also because Dumbledore really, really trusts Snape, and I think that says a lot. Now we have all the bad of Snape in book 3, which is undoubtedly Snape's worst book. We see more favoritism toward the Slytherins, we see more of him constantly picking on other students, but gotta be one of the worst scenes when Neville is, again, really struggling with a potion, specifically because he's so terrified of Snape that he's jittery and not thinking straight. And we see this, I believe it's in book 6, when Slughorn comes into the scene, and both Neville and Harry start doing much better at potions under Slughorn's care because they're not being bullied constantly throughout the class. Anyway, Neville is in pieces and Snape is making it worse. Does anything get through that thick skull of yours? And then when Hermione politely offers to help, he says, I don't remember asking you to show off. He then follows up this wonderful display by telling the entire class, at the end of class, I'm gonna feed this potion to Neville's toad, and if I get what I want, it's gonna die. When he happily goes to feed the potion to the toad at the end of class, and the toad actually does shrink like the potion was supposed to do, Snape looks sour and then takes 5 points from Gryffindor because Hermione helped him and he didn't want her to. We also have the scene where Lupin takes all the students into the teacher's lounge to have them face against the Boggart as a great teaching moment, and Snape is still mad about not being able to kill Neville's toad in front of the class, so instead he just settles for humiliating him in front of the class. Possibly no one's warned you, Lupin, but this class contains Neville. I would advise you not to entrust him with anything difficult, not unless Miss Granger is hissing instructions in his ear. And then we get to see that he is Neville's Boggart. He's the one thing that Neville fears most in his entire life. His teacher. Once again, this speaks volumes. We see a few scenes every book of Snape prowling around, being real pissy and snapping at everyone that looks at him not wearing green robes. Actually, they're all wearing black robes. But you know, Slytherins. And we know that a large part of why Neville is so bad at potions is due to the harassment of Snape. But finding out that this man has harassed this, at this point, 13-year-old so badly that this kid is more terrified of this teacher than anything else in the world. Man, that speaks volumes. And then, later in the book, Snape takes over Lupin's class, and we have this whole scene where Snape is just whining and talking bad about Lupin and how bad of a teacher he is, and he didn't leave any notes for Snape to go off of about where the kids are. Hermione tries to explain to him, oh, I can tell you what we've done so far, and Snape cuts her off and tells her, no, I don't want to know. I just want to complain about Lupin. So then Snape jumps to the back of the book because he wants to teach them about werewolves because he wants to out Lupin. So then he starts asking questions about werewolves. Hermione's hand shoots up. Snape says, oh, no one can answer this? Hermione's hand is still up. Snape says, how pitiful that not a single student knows the answer. And then Hermione says, I know the answer, and tries to give it. Snape snaps at her, humiliates her in class. It's his brand. And then they just sit through the rest of the class taking notes from their textbook while Snape prowls up and down the aisles, critiquing their work that's already been graded by Lupin and talking about how bad of a job he did at grading them because this work is obviously terrible and these students are awful students. And then the whole scene in the Whomping Willow, oh man, it's hard. It's a hard one to look at because I kind of see both sides of it. Again, I understand Snape's vitriol for the Marauders. And yeah, all that was when he was a kid, but scars of abuse run deep. And I don't fault him for still really harboring bad feelings for the Marauders. I would want him to find some sort of healing, and it doesn't seem like he's found any, but at the same time, I get it, and I don't hate him for it. You see Snape just about lose it, where he's so excited that he's caught Sirius that he's saying stuff like, vengeance is sweet. He wants to go take Sirius as well as Lupin and have them both be kissed by Dementors without a trial, without turning them into the appropriate figures, because he's just so excited to kill them that he doesn't want to risk losing that moment, and he's just going to kill them, even though they haven't had a trial. Especially Lupin. All of that I could unpack for another 20 minutes because his pain is mixed in with his hatred. And I don't think it's okay for him to want to kill these people without a trial, but I do understand the level, the intensity of him in this moment. What I don't forgive him for is Harry. When everybody's trying to explain to him, no, you missed part of this conversation, you don't understand the full extent of what's going on, and he won't hear it, Harry confronts him, and Snape says, you would have been well served if he'd killed you. You'd have died like your father, too arrogant to believe you might be mistaken in black. Again, this is a 13-year-old kid. I know that Harry doesn't treat Snape well at all throughout this series either, but I forgive him for it because it started with Snape. He was immediately bullied by Snape. And so this child's vitriol for the teacher who was horrible to him from the moment he met him, I understand. But Snape telling a 13-year-old child, you would have done better to have died like your father, wow. And then, of course, Snape is just furious when the whole Time Turner thing happens and, you know, these innocent people are set free. In fact, he's so furious that he lets slip that Lupin is a werewolf, therefore making Lupin out of a job. And actually, it's really bad because we already know that werewolves are under a lot of prejudice in this world. Lupin comes into the school in ratty old clothes, looking well underfed, and slowly throughout this book, we see him starting to look better nourished now that he's had a few solid meals in his system. We can see that he's had a rough go for a little while. And it's because this world doesn't trust werewolves, and he can't get work if people know that he's a werewolf. And Snape basically ruined that for him. He let all these students and their parents know that Lupin was a werewolf, so now he can't work at the school anymore, he's not going to be able to find another job, and he's going to go back into a place of poverty and prejudice that he doesn't deserve, and Snape just did it because he was mad. It's really messed up, man. Book 4, when Harry and Malfoy attack each other in the hall right in front of Snape's class, and then Snape walks up and he's like, "What's going on?" And everybody's shouting that they did it, that person did it, that person did it. Harry's spell hit Goyle. Snape looks at Goyle, sends him off to the hospital wing. Malfoy's spell hits Hermione. Her teeth grow all the way down to her collarbones. Snape looks at Hermione and says, "I see no difference." And then Hermione runs away crying. Then later, Harry has a magazine that he's reading under his desk because it says some bad things about him, and Snape reads it out loud to the entire class because he feels like humiliating him. That's pretty much all we got from Snape in book 4. 2 negative scenes that at this point are just typical Snape, still not cool, but just more bullying of his students. Book 5, we have a really important Quidditch match coming up, and the Slytherins have started attacking Gryffindors in the halls, and he doesn't care. And in fact, he ignores 14 eyewitnesses when they try to bring it to him. Because his hatred does not start and end with Harry. It is for every student that is not a Slytherin. Oh, and then you also have the scene where Snape started ignoring Harry and leaving him alone in lessons because he was so mad at him. And then Harry was actually able to produce a good potion out of not being harassed during class time. So Snape smashed the vial on the ground and gave him a 0 because he felt like it. He's a good teacher. He does agree to teach Harry occlumency when Harry really desperately needs to learn it, and Dumbledore doesn't believe that he can teach him because he's very afraid of what Voldemort will do if Harry is in Dumbledore's presence. So Dumbledore asked Snape to teach him. Snape doesn't want to. He absolutely despises this kid, and he wants nothing to do with him, but he agrees because Dumbledore asked. This was great. Unfortunately, he handles the situation poorly. He doesn't actually tell Harry how to do anything. He just starts attacking him and then yelling at him when he gets it wrong. He doesn't handle this well. But then Harry violates Snape's privacy in an absolutely horrible way. That's how we get the memory of him being bullied by Harry's dad. And then Snape refuses to teach him again. And frankly, I don't fault him for this. Even though it's very important that Harry learns occlumency, after Harry, I don't blame him, honestly. Kicking the kid out and saying, "I'm not teaching you anymore after what you did," it's fair. What's not fair is how he kicked him out, because when Snape realized what Harry saw, he grabbed him on the arms so hard that he bruised him, he shook him, threw him to the ground on the dungeon floor, and then as Harry was leaving, Snape chucked a glass jar at him. Now we've actually crossed the line from mental abuse to that was physical abuse. Again, what Harry did was horrible, but physically harming a child, more horrible. I'll mention this because it happened. Snape does taunt Sirius for being locked alone in the mansion, in the house that he was raised in by his abusive family. And that's really not cool, but I'm not even gonna really get into that because it's not like Sirius wasn't also not able to move past their past and also still terrible to Snape. So I'm just gonna leave that. Now let's talk about the good that Snape did in book 5, because this one I think is really good. Not only does he give a fake Veritaserum to Umbridge when she wants to interrogate Harry, but then when she calls him to her office to ask for more Veritaserum and he says, "No, I don't have any more," Harry gives Snape a super cryptic message saying that Sirius is captured, and Snape brushes him off and leaves. This is, of course, necessary because he can't act like he knows what he's doing in front of Umbridge, but he gets the message and he immediately goes to contact Sirius to make sure that he's still at the house. When he does confirm that Sirius is safe, he's watching for Harry to come out of the forest because he saw Harry and Hermione and Umbridge enter the forest together, and he's watching for them to come out, making sure that they're safe, and he's gonna let Harry know that Sirius is fine. But when Harry doesn't come back out of the forest, he fears that Harry actually is going after Sirius. So Snape contacts the entire order so that they'll go save Harry, and then he contacts Sirius and says, please stay in your house so that you can warn Dumbledore and tell him what's going on, because Dumbledore wasn't there at the moment. And then he, from that moment, which of course Sirius didn't listen to the warning, he told Creature, and then, a lot of things happened. But regardless, after he told Sirius to stay put, he then went into the forest to search for Harry to make sure Harry was okay. This was the first moment during this reread where I realized, whoa, Snape actually is actively fighting behind the scenes, and we just don't see it because of the perspective we're in. It's not that he performed one great act at the end of his life, but this was the first moment where I saw that he is doing a lot behind the scenes that we're just not seeing. But he's also not just a part of the order begrudgingly on the good side because of his guilt, but he's actually actively working toward the order's good and toward pushing forward, trying to take down Voldemort. This scene was a pretty big game changer for me. It was where I finally got to see the layers of Snape for the first time. Now book 6, we have more typical Snape scenes. He's teaching the kids how to do nonverbal spells, and when Ron isn't doing great, Snape takes this as an advantage to continue to mess with Harry. So he says, step aside, I'll do it, and then he tries to hex Harry. And then when Harry creates a shield charm so strong that Snape is knocked back, but he does it verbally, Snape is mad at him. He also continues on with his emotional and mental abuse by making Harry serve his detention by rewriting out the cards of detention slips and why students got in trouble, and he intentionally does give Harry the work to write down everything that James and Sirius and the lot did wrong in their school years. So just rubbing Harry's nose in the fact that his dead dad was a bully. But the good he performed in book 6 is that he saved Dumbledore's life. When Dumbledore put on the ring and it cursed his hand and the curse was going to go all the way through his body, Snape was able to stop the curse and capture it in his hand so that it wouldn't continue to spread. Dumbledore's still gonna die in about a year, or at least they thought so at that point, but it gives him a little bit longer to live. In this scene, Snape is genuinely upset. He's upset that Dumbledore didn't come to him sooner so that he could have given him more time. He's upset that Dumbledore is now cursed to die soon. He's upset because he didn't get to fully protect this person that he is so devoted to up to this point. Also, after Dumbledore drinks the potion and he comes back to the castle and he is very, very weak, he insists that he needs Snape. Harry tries to get Madame Pomfrey, but Dumbledore says, no, it has to be Severus. And I think that Dumbledore's unwavering trust towards Snape also speaks volumes about what's happening behind the scenes. Also, Snape does not want to kill Dumbledore. Dumbledore has asked Professor Snape to kill him so that Malfoy's soul will be spared. And Snape doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to do it because he doesn't want to kill this guy that he has a lot of value for his life, and he doesn't want to do it because he knows that that's going to mean his own death eventually, and he doesn't want to die. And I don't blame him, but he does both of these things anyway because of his devotion toward Dumbledore, which again, I think says a lot about him. He also spends a lot of time in book 6 working toward helping Draco. Dumbledore does not want Draco to do the things that Voldemort has him commissioned to do, and he's trying to get Snape to continue to be his mentor and help him. Snape spends a lot of time trying to win Draco's trust back and trying to protect Draco from going too deep into being Voldy's follower. And then you have our final scene with Snape in this book, and this one is really interesting as well because when all of the Death Eaters are supposed to be leaving the castle, Snape is corralling them all and trying to get them all out. He tells Draco to run, he makes sure that Draco gets out safely, and then he's trying to corral the rest of them saying, we need to get out before the Ministry gets here. But in reality, they obviously have time. The Death Eaters are just really enjoying wreaking havoc before they leave. They're setting fire to Hagrid's hut, they're continuing to harm people, they're just having a good time before they head out. Snape doesn't want them to continue doing damage. He doesn't want them to continue harming these people. Snape, throughout this series, seems to really toe the line as a follower, where he does the amount that he has to do in order to be seen as a Death Eater and no more. That's not speaking towards his abuse to the children. That is all on him, and that is his horribleness. But as far as the pure evil of being a Death Eater, he always is only as much as he has to be a double agent and never more. And I think that this is a good example of that, because there's really no reason that these Death Eaters can't go ahead and have a good time before they head out. There's no reason they can't continue harming the people around them. But Snape doesn't want them to. He's trying to get them out, and even at one point, one of the Death Eaters turns and starts crucioing Harry, and Snape tells him, no, he's for the Dark Lord, leave him. But the thing is, he's for the Dark Lord to kill. They can do what they want as far as torturing him. There's no reason this guy can't torture Harry for a couple of minutes before he leaves, if that's what he feels like doing, if he's evil. That whole scene with Snape and Harry in the end is also just very, very interesting, because you still see his absolute hatred toward Harry while he's trying to protect him. He's taunting him. He's continuing to throw Harry's father in his face. He's furious at being called a coward. We really see how much anger this man harbors in his heart while he's still simultaneously protecting this kid that he despises more than anyone else. The contradictions of Snape within himself are so interesting to me. Snape's hunger for love and approval is also made really apparent in the memories from this book. They're from book 7, but the memories are happening during book 6. When Dumbledore tells Snape that for the first time, that he wants Snape to kill Dumbledore in order to protect Draco's soul, Snape's response is, "And what of my soul?" And that scene is really interesting to me, because we know that he served as a Death Eater for years, so we can easily assume that he's killed several people before, and his soul is already good and damaged, or at least it was at that point. I like to think that it's healed a little bit by now. But I don't think that this scene is Snape being worried for his soul. Dumbledore even says, "Only you know if it would actually hurt your soul to kill me for a good reason and not out of hatred." I don't think Snape was worried about the fracturing of his soul or the damaging of his soul here. I think Snape's just more hurt that this person that he clearly values a lot, he has put so much trust and value in Dumbledore, and this person that he values so much is valuing protecting someone else's soul over his. And he's hurt that he wants to protect Draco while still asking this of Snape. We see this again when he and Dumbledore are walking along the grounds, and Snape is genuinely hurt that Dumbledore won't tell him his full plans. Dumbledore says, "I have information I need to give him," and Snape says, "Information? You trust him and you don't trust me?" That same hunger for love and acceptance that he was craving from Lily so badly, he's now put on Dumbledore. And it genuinely, the amount of trust that Dumbledore puts in Snape, like I said, I really think that Snape was basically his right-hand man throughout this entire series. Dumbledore even responds to Snape by saying, "There are things that I've trusted you with that I would trust no one else with." And Snape values that friendship that these two have developed. He values it so much that it really hurts him when Dumbledore is putting value in someone else over him in one way or another. Then we skip forward to when Snape and Dumbledore meet in Dumbledore's office, and Dumbledore finally trusts Snape with the information. He tells him, "You need to be the one to tell Harry," because Dumbledore realizes that he's not going to be alive. So he says, "You need to be the one to tell Harry at the last possible moment. You need to tell him that he has to sacrifice himself in order to save everyone. In order to be able to kill Voldy, he has to sacrifice himself and kill the last bit of the Horcrux." Snape is horrified by this. He says, "I thought all these years that we were protecting him for her, for Lily." He goes on, he looks horrified and says, "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment. Don't be shocked, Severus. How many men and women have you watched die? Lately, only those whom I could not save. You have used me." Meaning, I have spied for you and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger for you. Everything was supposed to be to keep Lily Potter's son safe. Now you tell me that you have been raising him like a pig for slaughter. This is touching, Severus. Have you grown to care for the boy after all? For him? And then Snape reveals that his Patronus is still a doe, which was Lily's Patronus. Dumbledore says, "After all this time, always. So again, this scene reveals so much of Snape. All this time, he's been protecting Harry for Lily, and so Dumbledore didn't think that Snape would have any issue with Harry being a sacrifice because Snape hates Harry. And then when Snape does have a problem with it, Dumbledore thinks that Snape actually has grown fond of Harry. Snape is repulsed by the idea that someone would think that of him. Of course, it's not for him. It's still always for Lily. Some people view this as romantic, some people view it as an obsession. I'm not going to comment on that. We're just going to keep moving forward into book 7. This one will be really quick because most of book 7 was already discussed throughout the rest of the books. Obviously, under Snape's care as a headmaster, the school descends into this horrible place where people are being actively tortured. The kids are being taught to do the unforgivable curses on each other when they get detention. All of this, I think, is the only time that we can actually reasonably rationalize Snape's behavior as him being undercover. At this point, he's the headmaster of the school, so the school has to descend into chaos because he still needs to look like he's on Voldy's side. This is the only time that I accept the argument that Snape is a cruel, hateful abuser for the image. I think it's very clear that his hatred is deeply ingrained in his heart and not an act. However, I don't fully fault him for the appearance of the school because this actually is in large part undercover. In the beginning of book 7, Snape does save Lupin's life. One Death Eater is trying to kill Lupin, and then Snape tries to send a spell at that Death Eater's hand, which would put Snape at risk. And then that's when George's ear is cursed off because the spell missed. But this is the scene that I find so fascinating is during the Battle of Hogwarts. When Snape and Voldy and Nagini are all hidden away, and Voldemort is trying to talk to Snape because he's realized that he has to kill him in order to have power of the Elder Wand. And Snape is desperately trying to get away. He's saying, "Let me go find Harry. Let me bring him to you," over and over and over again. And Voldy keeps saying, "No, don't go find Harry. I need to talk to you." And Snape keeps saying, "Let me go find him. Let me go find him. I need to get him for you." And this scene has always seemed odd to me. Is he just trying to get away because he realizes that he's about to die? How is that going to help anything? He already knows he has to die. What is this scene? And I finally realized we see in Snape's memories that Dumbledore told Snape at the very last moment, you have to tell Harry that he has to sacrifice himself in order to save everyone. This is what Snape's doing. He realizes that his time has come, that Voldemort's gonna kill him, and Snape's trying to get out one last time so he can go find Harry, so he can finally tell him, this is the message that Dumble's left for me. He's trying to get to Harry to tell Harry that he has to be a sacrifice so that it can all end the way it needs to end. That's why he's so desperately basically blowing his cover, repeatedly going against what Voldy's telling him to do, trying to get to Harry in the last moment, is to deliver this one last message that has to be delivered now. It's really great that Harry was there to witness it all so that Snape could still give him the memory, even though Snape couldn't get out to tell him. But I think that that's a really cool scene for him. And I think it's really interesting to look at the fact that Snape he switched sides for bad reasons, right? Snape actively was fighting for a supremacy group that was murdering innocent people, and he was happy to do it. It's what he wanted to do. And it wasn't until one of the deaths affected him that he finally switched sides. And then he didn't even do it because he realized that what was happening was horrible. He did it because of this obsession that he had for Lily. He actively, for 7 books, put himself in danger and fought to protect Harry while also abusing Harry. He wasn't able to separate his hatred and his love. The two ended up mixing into one really contradictory person. His motivations for being on the right side were Lily, not for being on the right side. His motivations weren't for what he believed in, it was for who he was fixated on. But I find it really interesting that nothing changed when he realized that what he had dedicated years of his life for had to come to an end. He dedicated years of his life to protecting Harry for Lily's sake. And when he realized that it had to end with him not protecting Harry anymore, with Harry dying. And so what he had been fighting for all this time wasn't actually what was going to happen, he had to reckon with that, and that's what that whole scene was with Dumbledore. And when he realized that he wasn't going to be able to continue to fight to protect Lily's child, he had to make a choice. Stay and continue to fight for this cause, or not. And I find it really interesting that after he realized that he isn't going to be fighting to protect Lily's son anymore, he still continued to follow out Dumbledore's mission, which I think is a really good display that at some point, maybe even unwillingly, Snape did actually change sides. Not just in action, but wholeheartedly, he was now fighting for this cause, even when his motivation of Lily was removed. But I also really appreciate that in the memories we see Snape going into Sirius's old home and finding a picture and a letter of Lily, and he took the last part of the letter where it said, "With love from Lily," and he took that in his robe pocket, and then he took the picture of Lily with her husband and son, ripped it in half, chucked her husband and son to the ground, and kept the picture of Lily. I appreciate that that's in the memories too, because it also shows us that even though Snape has done so much behind the scenes for the greater good, he hasn't wholly changed. He isn't a whole new person. He still has this fixation on Lily and hatred toward her family, or at the very least, ambivalence toward her family. We end Snape's memories on one last moment from book 7, and that is when Phineas is going back and forth between his portraits and he's traveling with the kids in Hermione's purse, and Phineas finally realizes where the kids are so that Snape can deliver the Sword of Gryffindor to Harry. Again, he doesn't know why he's doing it, he's just acting on Dumbledore's command because Dumbledore said so. When he was waiting for Phineas to find out where they were so that Snape could give Harry the sword. And when Phineas finally says, "I know where they are," he says, "I heard the mudblood say it." And Snape snaps, "Don't use that word." And that's the Snape scene that we end on. Snape is an incredibly interesting character. He devotes a large part of his life dedicated to risking his own health and goals and life to protect the physical state of Lily's son, while at the same time harming the mental state of James's son. And I think that says a lot about Snape. He never viewed Harry as his own person. He only viewed him through the lens of his love for Lily or his hatred for James. Harry never got to be Harry to Snape. Most arguments that I see about Snape are really one-sided, focusing on some scenes and kind of ignoring others. He's not just a bully who did one good thing at the end of his life. He clearly did many, many, many acts behind the scene for the greater good. He's also not just a broken hero who was bullied as a kid, and therefore we can justify the bullying he does as an adult. We can't brush Snape's abusive and hateful behavior under the rug, but we also can't just ignore the many, many sacrifices that he made. I honestly can't imagine the mental toll it would take to be a double agent for a Nazi supremacy group. Having to watch horrible things happen to people that he knows, like his co-worker that was rotating above the table at the beginning of one of the books, and he just has to act okay with it. He watches horrible things happen to people and has to seem okay, and sometimes probably even participate in these horrible acts, while at the same time trying to quietly and undercover do what's right. That would take a lot out of a person's mental state. Snape was unnecessarily cruel and hateful toward a lot of people, not just the students, but he was really awful to his coworkers, the teachers that he worked with, and they all really didn't like him either because of how constantly mean he was. And that's on him. Snape harbored a lot of hatred in his life. And I don't subscribe to the idea that if you're bullied, you're damned to become a bully. I don't subscribe to the idea that we can dismiss someone's abusive behaviors if they themselves were abused. I can certainly have a lot more compassion for them if I see a damaged person damaging others, but I will not excuse that behavior. I think a lot of this discussion comes from the way Snape's character was executed. His actions are either utterly vile or absolutely incredible, and his motivations half the time aren't even good. They're rooted in an obsession. But you can also see his devotion and his hunger for approval and love when we start to see a lot of the things that he did behind the scenes, as well as when we see the connection and relationship he had with Dumbledore. I think that Snape is one of the most complex and interesting characters to dive into. And I think a lot of the problem that the fandom has with agreeing with him, or even just being on such polarizing sides of how they see him, is in his execution. Through 6 books, we almost exclusively see him as this horrible abuser, and it's in such an extreme way. And then in book 7, we see that he sacrificed so much and he did so many great acts. And both things are done in such extreme ways and in ways that are completely removed from each other that it seems like a lot of times the fandom will latch onto this and ignore that, or latch onto this and ignore that. And I think with more nuance, we would be able to more clearly see the many, many layers of him, that he is neither only an abuser or only a hero, but there are a lot of layers to him. And while at the end of this, when I finished all of this thinking about a fictional character that's not even real, I think the conclusion I've come to about this character is that I feel like I understand him and appreciate him so much more than I ever have. I respect the many, many sacrifices he made, and I now see his actions behind the scene of trying to actively protect Harry and trying to move forward the Order's mission, working as a double agent and doing horrendous acts that he genuinely didn't want to do. I see his great sacrifice and I respect it so much more, and I have a lot more respect for this character than I ever have before. But I'm also just not going to brush under the rug the many, many, many horrible things that he did. He was so horrible to the people around him. He harbored so much hatred, and he was so mentally abusive to these children that simply didn't deserve it. And I'm not going to brush that under the rug because he did perform heroic acts. He was a jerk. He was a horrible, horrible person, but also an incredibly sacrificial one. It's probably true that if Voldemort went after Neville instead of Harry and Neville's family died, Snape may still be a Death Eater. That's very possible because we see that his motivation throughout the entire series was wrapped around Lily, not around the good of wizard kind. So yeah, that's probably accurate, which is why I think that it's terribly wrong to view Snape as simply a hero. But I also see the amount of sacrifice that man made physically and mentally for the greater good, and I see that when protecting Lily's son was removed from the equation for Snape, he still continued forward. And I think that says a lot about the personal growth he had. But I don't think that his personal growth was holistic enough to justify him being viewed as a black and white hero, because it didn't change the fact that he still was an abuser and someone who had so much hatred and harm toward others. I think that it's really hard when you've identified with one part of Snape's character. It's really hard to separate that in the discussion, especially since the thing that people seem to latch onto is abuse. But they latch onto it in different places. The people that love Snape latch on to the abuse that was given to Snape. And they feel for him and they sympathize with him and they can understand and write off the abuse that he caused and instead just love the good things he did. And then the other side of people who hate Snape latch on to the abuse that Snape caused, and they reject all of the good things that he did. I find it interesting that no matter what side of the Snape spectrum people are on, they latch on to abuse. They just either latch on to the abuse that was done to him or the abuse that he did to others. Either way, wherever you fall, he's a very complex character that if you dig into has a whole lot of layers. And even though I hate so much about who he chose to be, I'm glad that he's a character in these books, because he was complex, and I really had fun digging into his character in these last few days. I've been filming for 2 hours. Oh my goodness. Be sure to tell me what you think about Snape's character. Try to be civil about it. Let's not attack each other, please. I post videos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.